I'm Garth Callender from Bravery Trust. Thanks for joining us as we share the real experiences of veterans navigating life beyond service and the impact that practical financial support can make in moments that truly matter. These are real stories, real impact. Let's begin. Let me introduce you to Rory McDonald, a man who spent more than 25 years proving that service and ambition are not competing forces, they're complementary ones. Rory is a major in the Australian Army Reserve, serving as an infantry officer since 2016. But his story didn't start with the uniform. Long before he commissioned, Rory had spent nearly 2 decades building an impressive corporate career in Australian retail, starting on the shop floor as a young man and steadily rising through the store management, area management and state leadership roles that gave him responsibility for hundreds of people and millions of dollars in revenue. He joined Coles in 2018 and hasn't looked back through regional management, head of store operations of Victoria, assistant state manager and head of Coles Local. Rory has led at scale through some of the most demanding periods Australian retail has ever faced, including the COVID years when supermarket leaders were making life-affecting decisions in real time every day. He's recently stepped into his most senior role yet, head of bakery at Coles Group, a national position shaping one of the most visible categories in the business. And through it all, he's kept wearing uniform. Rory holds a Master of Business Administration from La Trobe University, a Master of International Relations, and has completed the Australian Institute of Company Directors course in 2022. He's the kind of leader who doesn't stop investing in himself and who understands that leading people, whether in stores or on exercise, is a craft that deserves serious attention. He is also someone who understands why Bravery Trust exists and why the work we do matters. Rory, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for that very kind introduction.
You've already built a serious career in retail and you're already well and truly on your way when you made the decision to commission in the Army in 2016. Can you take us back to that moment? What drove you to that decision?
Yeah, well, I think I grew up in a family where there was a lot of people in uniform, so it was always something that I was interested in doing. And I left high school, finished off year 12, and I thought I would work in retail for a couple of years and then, transition across into probably over to full-time service in the Army. And I sort of got into this position where I landed in this cadet manager job in a supermarket. I thought it would be something I would do for 1 or 2 years. And it was a great career and it gave me a lot of opportunities that probably were a little bit unexpected. And I got to this stage where my civilian career was going really well. I was, earning a good living and life was good. And I was pretty happy doing that. But then I got to around 30 or 31 when I started to think, I've, still really want to have that experience of serving. And I realised that I probably could do that through the Army Reserve, and that was what made me join. I was thinking about it and dialed the number, and here I am.
Yeah, good on you. Look, most people would look at a senior corporate role and an Australian Army commission and think, hey, pick one. What do people closest to you say when you tell them about doing both?
Yeah, most people find it difficult to come to terms with, I think, is probably the first thing. People in my civilian employment find it just unusual that I would go out and I've just come off a training weekend on the weekend and they just can't comprehend the fact that I would finish work at 4 o'clock on a Friday, go to the depot and then go out to a training activity in Puckapunyal over the weekend and come home Sunday night and have a hot dinner and a sleep and then come back to work on a Monday. And people just think that's nuts. There are plenty of times where when you're juggling civilian and military career that you can feel like you're being average at 2 jobs instead of good at one. I think that's probably a pretty common experience for Army reservists that I talk to. And there's definitely some trade-offs and there's been times where I've had to prioritise one over the other. But equally there's some great synergies and I feel like that's kind of the art is if you can find that sweet spot where the two things intersect and you can make them both work for you, there's some real value in that. I think Coles kind of really likes the idea that they've got this Army major that works for them and is running around solving problems. And equally, I think the Army likes the idea that they've got some corporate executive, doing the same thing. And I think once I'd managed to sort of find a way to make the two work together and find those synergies between the two, that was when it really started to be a lot easier to get that balance right.
Is it the same Rory who wears the Coles polo that is also, the next day wearing the army uniform? You're the same guy? Do you carry yourself differently in the two different roles?
Yeah, I think I am mostly. I mean, there's definitely some adjustments. There's a lot of things that I sort of can bring from the army back into my civilian employment, but the language is a little different, or the way that you position things might be slightly different. But, all my training that I've had through my military career, and I think about the military appreciation process or the way that we brief things, I've used that very effectively in my civilian career, and people think, gee, that was such a good briefing. Like, where did you learn to do that? And maybe not quite using some of the same language, or it might not be delivered in exactly the same way, but there's a lot of things that you can leverage and bring back into the civilian environment really effectively.
We talk a lot at Bravery Trust about how sometimes people, when they leave defence, they struggle after service precisely because their identity is tied to the uniform and their career. Are you actively avoiding that trap by having these two careers, or how does that play out for you with your identity? Who do you see yourself as?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I actually do feel like I'm a soldier before I'm a corporate executive. Interestingly, I think that's got a lot to do with the sense of purpose and the meaning that I think comes with service. And that might be something that some people would find unusual, given that the military is really my second career and my corporate career was my first career. But I think it has a lot more to do with who I am and the way that I see the world, and, my sort of sense of purpose. But then I think in terms of that transition back into the civilian environment and the civilian employer, I think that where sometimes people struggle is they don't realise the value of the things that they've been trained or the experiences they've got and how to apply that.
Yeah.
Like, sure, you can't go around to all your civilian co-workers and knife hand them and talk to them the way you would out bush in the middle of a section attack or a platoon attack. But, those skills that you've got around project management and planning and organisation and strategy, all you really need to do is work at how to use the right corporate language, and you can then apply those same things. And I would say that even if you go from one civilian employee to another, every organisation has its own language and its own way of talking about things and its own way of positioning things. And actually, the key to success when you go from one organisation to the other is to work out how to tap into that language and walk and talk and sound like the people that work in that organisation. And I think that it's just a slightly bigger leap when you go from the military into a civilian organisation. And I think people that can work out how to do that will be more successful when they make that transition.
I really like what you've said about those transferability of skills and what you've learned from one organisation transferring to the other. So, you've led teams of hundreds in Coles, and you've led teams of hundreds of soldiers. What's the most surprising thing the Army has taught you that you can apply back to the corporate world?
I reckon that there's one particular moment that was probably about 4 days into my basic training experience at Kapooka that I remember. And it's, one of those anecdotes that you're sort of able to play back to the people that I work with in Coles. And it really goes back to the first couple of days where you're, tearing your bed sheets off and standing in the hallway with your bed sheets over your shoulders and numbering off and going through that
such a magical
awesome
time.
experience. Yeah. And I remember having this experience where I was in this room where there was 3 other guys that were kind of older like me as well. So, we kind of worked it out pretty quick, and we worked out a bit of a system, and, we worked out how to basically look after each other and get through that process, and everyone's able to go off and, get their morning routine done. And we'd be standing in the hallway in uniform ready to go for the day, and we're looking across the hallway at the next room or down the hallway at the room to the left and the right and thinking, why can't these guys get it together? And, of course, as everyone who's been through that experience would know, of course, you're then out doing push-ups on the lawn out the back and then back up the stairs, and then you get back into bed and pretend you're asleep and do it all over again until you get it right. And, I remember they had this sort of 21-year-old corporal drill instructor came up to the 3 of us in our room and said, like, don't you get it? When are you going to realise what this is about? And I thought, we were sort of incrementally making our bed slightly better and even more awesome than it was the time before, and kind of almost feeling a little bit frustrated by the guy across the room that hadn't put his pants on yet. And so what we realised is actually, you know what, we need to quickly get our stuff done, and then we need to start helping everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I played that anecdote back to store managers and regional managers that I've worked with. I think about my time in Coles, there'd be one store that's having all sorts of problems, and then there's a store 5 Ks down the road that's worked it all out and solved it. And I think in the corporate world, often we really reward and support and laud those high performers, and we, pay them more, and they get, bigger incentives, and they get promoted. And the thing that's really different about the Army is that it really values teamwork, and it really values making sure that you don't leave people behind. And I remember that moment, thought, this is cool. This is why I'm here. And basic training is not the most amazing experience, but there was a few things I took away from that and thought, gee, civilian employees could learn a lot from some of this stuff.
Yeah, that's really powerful, bringing up those around you. Yeah, it's almost a metaphor for what we do at Bravery Trust, or what we strive to do at Bravery Trust. Yeah, absolutely. So you were 31 at recruit training.
Yep.
So which is older?
Old in Army terms, yeah.
I remember joining, and we had a guy in my section who was 27, and we called him Pops.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, can we flip that around? Because you went to recruit training with already a world of experience from the high pressure retail world. Are there things that you have brought to the Army from those experiences?
Yeah, I think being an officer cadet and a lieutenant is a humbling experience. You're learning a lot in a complex environment. I remember my first appointment as a platoon commander. The 3 corporals that I had all deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq and had years and years and years of experience, and my platoon sergeant had 25 years experience, and I'd been in the Army for what kind of felt like months, really. So that's a humbling experience, and there's a steep learning curve, and there's a lot of people to learn a lot from. But I actually feel like that decade of leadership experience, by the time I'd joined the Army, I'd been a regional manager, and I'd had 1,500 people working for me, and was managing 12 large format retail outlets. So that just experience of dealing with complexity and dealing with, organisational pressures and managing systems, and most importantly, dealing with humans and managing and leading people, I think made that experience of being a fresh lieutenant a little bit easier for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably as I got further along in my career as a senior captain and now as a major, some of that experience I've got of leading leaders, over the last couple of decades, I think still is paying for itself in spades. So it's definitely has made some of those learning experiences that a new lieutenant might have to work really hard to work through. It's probably helped me get through that a little bit easier.
Coles is a publicly listed company with shareholders and commercial imperatives. The Army operates on quite a different value system. Have there been moments when there has been, those two worlds have genuinely pulled you in opposite directions? And, can you give us an example, and how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I think probably the most obvious example would be during bushfires and COVID.
Yeah.
And if you think about bushfires as a time when the supermarket industry had a lot of pressure on it to, manage the logistics, moving stock around Australia and avoiding all these areas where roads were not serviceable, or dealing with growing regions that weren't able to provide ingredients and product. So the organisation was working really hard, and that was a time where we had the call up, and I went away and spent a month, on bushfire assist, and was doing really important work in that space, which I really enjoyed, and was quite rewarding to sort of think, actually, we've done all this training, and now I get to be here and serve the community in uniform. That was a great experience, but definitely in the back of my mind was that there was a whole bunch of people that probably would have liked me to have been at work doing my normal job. And same through COVID, there was a couple of months there where I was away doing different tasks on operations in COVID. And, that was another time when the supermarket industry was in a pretty unique space. And I think the way that I've had to manage that is to just make sure that I've got good succession planning in my civilian role, which interestingly, nobody ever complains when I say, hey, would you like to step up and do my job for a bit? It's not that hard to find people who want to step up and do the boss's job. And I think getting that established. And, because I'm an Army reservist and I know that I'm going to be away on exercise or on courses occasionally, the expectation is that the person who my number 2 and number 3 are, they've both got to be ready to step in at a moment's notice. And we go into it with that mindset. And then when it does happen, it makes it a little bit easier to manage.
It's a great mindset, and it's not as common as you'd expect out in the corporate world to have people who are properly postured for succession planning, as in ready for their subordinates to step into their space.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you find yourself unique? Is that something that you've had to build people into those roles, being agile enough to step up into your role?
Yeah, I think, again, it's not that hard to find people who want to step up and do more in their career. Actually, that's a pretty easy conversation to have. And I think the necessity of my Army Reserve career has just really forced me and those people that I've been working with in all the different roles that I've had along the way to really make sure that, hey, we've got to get you ready because I'm going to be away for, a month in July and I'm going to be away for another 2 weeks in September. And, that really means that we're forcing that to be occurring and happening as quick as possible so that we can be ready for when that comes along. And I think that's been good for the team. And I would say that in most of the jobs that I've had in corporate life, I would like to think I was known for someone who was developing talent and helping bring people through the system. And part of that is helping me manage my my sort of dual careers, but it's actually also a great thing to do to help bring people along in their career.
Hey, there is a lot to like about what you've just said. Not the least being you've got an employer who gets that and facilitates you being able to have that agility in your life. Is that what genuine support from an employer looks like?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm lucky that I work for a large organisation that has got Army reservists working in the system, and I think also has an appreciation for the work that I do in the Army Reserve. And Coles has been amazing support whenever I've had to go away and deploy on operations or do courses or field exercises. And I've been fortunate enough also to have really good line managers who have been very supportive and have really worked with me to make this work.
You've ended up now with 2 bloody important roles in 2 different organisations. Can I talk a little bit now about leading people through hardship? You've managed large retail workforces through COVID, and through significant organisational change, I'm sure. You've led soldiers on domestic operations during COVID, during bushfires. You've had people under you with genuine sustained stress. What have you learned about recognising that in people and working with them who are struggling before they hit the breaking point?
Yeah, well, I think the supermarket industry is not glamorous. It's super high paced, super low margins. If it takes 10 hours to do a job, you'll probably have 9 hours to do it. So I've spent my whole career working in an industry that is high tempo, very low margin, and an industry full of people that work incredibly hard. And I think learning at a relatively young age, leading large groups of people in that kind of environment, certainly made lots of mistakes along the way and have been able to learn from that. And I think I've learned to pay attention to people and notice signs earlier and be able to sort of talk to people about that. And then I think if you then look at my experience in the Army, there's no other job that would put you in the sort of circumstances that military service will. And you think about could be doing a long patrol, or you could be on defensive operations and you're digging a defensive position for a couple of days and doing it on very little sleep and not much other than just sort of raw willpower and desire to get the job done. And I think those kind of formative experiences, I think help you know that once you get through that, no matter how bad things are or how tough things are, it will eventually be over and there'll be light at the end of the tunnel and you'll come through it. I think the first time you go through some of those experiences, it can be tough, but once you've had that experience once or twice, you know that you'll come out the other end of it. And I think being able to remind yourself of that and then being able to remind others of that and nurture them through that, I think is really important. And I've had experiences in both of my careers that have really helped reinforce that.
Yeah. Bravery Trust exists because largely because formal support structures don't always catch people And financial hardship is one of the more invisible forms of suffering. People hide it. There's stigma around it. People can be ashamed of it. From your experience leading through hardship, what's the case for an organisation that can move faster and reach people where they are?
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting question. I think, one of the big challenges with as you said, that sort of challenge is people will often conceal that or might feel uncomfortable sharing that. And I guess, you kind of have to meet people where they are and able to support them through that sort of circumstance. It helps to normalise the conversation around that, where if someone's having a rough time, make sure that it's okay to ask for help. And I think that, organisations like Coles, being able to just make sure that the leaders in the organisation that are out in stores or in the support centre leading teams create an environment where it's okay to have those kind of conversations helps a little bit. And, I think across the community, we're probably getting a little bit better at that. Make it a bit easier for people to identify themselves and reach out for support, I think is probably integral to making that work.
You sit in a senior leadership role in one of Australia's largest employers. What do we say, 130,000 employees across the country. What's the business case? Not just the moral case for organisations like Coles backing veterans and supporting Bravery Trust?
Well, we're really proud of the relationship we have with Bravery Trust, and we've been involved with Bravery Trust now, I think, since about 2014, and over the years have raised about $6.3 million for Bravery Trust. As someone who's an Army reservist and works for Coles, I'm really proud of the relationship we have with Bravery Trust and the role that we play. And it's great to have the privilege and the opportunity to be involved in the way that I am. We know that lots of the people that shop in our stores and our team, we've got across that 130,000 team members, there's lots of veterans, reservists and defence families that are in that customer base, but also those people that work in our shops. And we know that they're a really important part of the community that do a type of work that, sometimes can leave some challenges for those who've been involved in that. And I think, we do a lot of work across the community in different forums, and I think about the work we do with sustainability and, making sure that food waste goes to places that is a positive thing. And I think that, the work we do with Bravery Trust in veterans is an extension of that large body of work that we do across a number of different community groups.
And tell me if I'm wrong here as well, but from memory, the Coles brand association with veteran really goes back a century. It goes back to the original founder, G.J. Coles, who himself was a veteran and had lost brothers during the First World War and came back to Australia. And I saw a delightful little image of his recruitment document, and his occupation was listed as storekeeper.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yep. He ended up being a little more than a storekeeper, I think, or a keeper of many stores. But, it's really nice to have that connection. And, I think I think what it really goes to show, though, is that, it's an organisation that's a part of the Australian community, and defence and veterans are a part of that community. And to be able to have that connection with the founder of the organisation, I think really just brings that home.
And for Australians listening today who want to do something, what's the most meaningful way that they can get behind Bravery Trust?
Well, I know that they can tap into your website and get to learn a bit about more what your organisation does, and there's probably many ways that they can engage with Bravery Trust. Just before we go into Anzac Day, we'll be raising some money and building some awareness around Bravery Trust across their network of stores. So each year for the last few years, and we're doing again this year, leading into Anzac Day, we will be donating 40 cents for every packet of Anzac biscuits that we sell. So you'll be able to get into any Coles store across Australia, and you should be able to find those on a table up the front of the shop with a bit of point of sale that will hopefully tell you a little bit about what Bravery Trust does, and then you can make that connection there. But by all means, find out a bit more about what Bravery Trust does by reaching out to the website and connecting with your team.
Yeah, thank you. And it's an incredibly generous campaign supporting Bravery Trust that Coles is running. And Bravery Trust doesn't work in the employment space, but we're very focused on finances, and to be honest, they're intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
And I'm really keen for your thoughts on from working in both defence and the corporate sector. If an potential employer, is sitting on the fence about employing somebody with a military background or even a reservist, what would be your pitch to them?
Well, I think the number one thing that I think comes to mind is the training and the experiences that you get from military service. There's nothing else like it in the corporate world. I mean, picture this: the army, or I assume all services would be the same. You're spending 95% of your time training and preparing, and then 5% of your time on operations. Broadly speaking.
Yep.
In corporate life, you're spending 5% of your time training and preparing and 95% of your time on operations. And the benefit that I've had, and the benefit that everyone who's served in the ADF has, is world-class professional training at a level that really just is not available in the corporate world. And I think there's a real case for opening the doors to these people that are highly trained, resilient, really strong leaders, and being able to allow them to come into your organisation and make a really positive impact.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, I've got 2 questions to finish up on. The first one is, hey, you've just started in a new role ahead of bakeries at Coles. You're still wearing uniform and continuing success in uniform. What do the next 5 years look like for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I've got a couple of years ahead of me as OC at Monash Company in Melbourne University Regiment, and I'm looking forward to that. If things go well, hopefully I'll get to go to Command and Staff College and do another posting as a major after that. That'll pretty much fill out the next 5 years from an Army point of view. In Coles, I'm really enjoying the work that I'm doing at the moment. At some stage I might get to move to another role in a different part of the organisation. Coles has been really good at giving me some different experiences. I've spent a lot of time in operations, and recently did a couple of roles that were across format and strategy, and I'm now in a commercial role. So I've been really fortunate to have quite a varied and positive experience in my time in Coles. So who knows?
Awesome. And look, all the best with those career aspirations. I think they're, very, very much achievable. Final question. What do you know now, having lived through this dual career, that you wish somebody had told you right at the start?
Well, I mean, the number one thing, I just wish I started earlier. It's been awesome. There's definitely some challenges. You'll be out when it's pouring rain and you're cold and wet and miserable on a training activity, and thinking, gee, I've got this cruisy corporate, suburban life. Why am I doing this? And everyone will have little moments where they might think, gee, was this a good idea? But really, the opportunity to serve in the Army Reserve and lead Australian soldiers, there's no greater honour and privilege in my opinion. So I've really enjoyed it. I think the Army Reserve does a really good job of making sure that, you're able to sort of set the tempo a little bit. If you've got a bit on and you've just had a baby, or you've just got a new job or something like that, you can dial it down for a little while you go and manage that. And then when you have the opportunity to do more, there's always plenty of work on. And, so really, and you're working with a bunch of other people that are in broadly the same set of circumstances and understand that and will work with you to manage that. I just wish I did it earlier. And as I get around and talk to people, particularly in Coles, often they'll say, gee, I've always thought about doing that. How do you do it? And my advice is, pick up the phone and just make it happen. It's something that I wish I did much earlier than I did.
Rory McDonald, you're a powerful advocate for service, for putting on military uniform, but also you're a great reminder that service doesn't end when you take that uniform off. The qualities of military builds in a person doesn't stay in the barracks. It shows up in the civilian workplace, in boardrooms, at store operation centres, and in the quiet moments when a leader decides to pay attention to someone who is struggling. And that's what Bravery Trust is here about, supporting people who haven't found their way, need a hand up, and need assistance to stay there. Hey, Rory, thank you for your time today, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me along.
Thank you for joining us on this podcast. At Bravery Trust, we work with veterans and their families when facing financial hardship by providing timely financial assistance, education to build financial skills, and support to manage debt. If today's conversation has moved you, we'd love your support. Visit braverytrust.org.au to donate, to learn more, or to find out how your organisation can get involved. And if you're a veteran doing it tough, please reach out. You've earned the right to ask for help. Thanks for listening.